everyone threw a Bitcoin in. And the pot was 23 Bitcoin, and so that's just such a funny story that, at the time people were like, yeah, they'll just chuck a Bitcoin into the center of the poker table.
Probably now one of the biggest pots of the year.
Yeah, it'd be 25 million.
Yeah, high rollers.
Welcome back to the Crypto Playbook. Today, we're going to follow up our Bitcoin episode with a look at the wider world of crypto. We're talking Ethereum, Solana, Litecoin, Dogecoin, Fartcoin, all those strange other coins out there. And to help us make sense of it, we've brought in one of the founding venture capitalists of the industry, Dan Morehead, the founder of Pantera Capital. Leo, what are you planning to ask him about?
Yeah, so Dan is really interesting because he was really one of the first TradFi or traditional financial people to come into crypto. He's known for previously being at Goldman Sachs, at the famous investment firm Tiger, and then was able to get seed capital from Fortress, which is a very famous private equity firm, to become one of the first movers in Bitcoin. So one of the first people outside of this weird world of crypto to start acquiring Bitcoin. But unlike a lot of the Bitcoin maxis, one of whom we heard from last episode with Jack Mallers, Dan believes that Bitcoin is not the only cryptocurrency, that there's utility beyond Bitcoin by investing in these other blockchains that have emerged, such as Ethereum and all the projects that have been built on top of that. So I thought he would be a really good figure to explain both those early days of crypto, what happened after Bitcoin, as well as what the pitch is for cryptocurrencies other than Bitcoin. Jeff, I'm curious, what do you think happened after Bitcoin? What did that history look like?
Yeah, I don't know. I remember like once upon a time, like with history generally, there's the philosopher Francis Bacon. They say he was last man to know everything. Because at a certain point, there's so much knowledge you could know in the world. And with crypto, I feel it's sort of the same thing. There was a point where I sort of thought I knew everything that had happened in crypto because there was Bitcoin. And then there's a handful of other coins. There was like Litecoin and Dogecoin and XRP. And then you had another kind of Ethereum came and then some copycats of that. And then at some point now there's just like thousands or maybe even millions of coins out there. So I confess just trying to keep up with what's out there is becoming more challenging. Although I do think we can slot them into eras. There's the early crypto era, Bitcoin and its clones like Litecoin, stuff like that, and even Dogecoin are based on the same code. And then Ethereum came in. That inaugurated, made it easier to launch copycat coins or sort of layer 2 coins on top of Ethereum. And then that led to the ICO, initial coin era, where there's a whole bunch more stuff. And, needless to say, 90% of the stuff are complete swindles and like pie in the sky, whatever they are. But then lately we're in the meme coin era where there's now, it just seems like it's infinite number of coins. So how about you? How do you keep track of all this stuff on your beat?
Yeah, I was going to say, for most people, I think this is only relevant for if they want to invest in different tokens and they see ones that explode, 100,000% in a week, and it's a way to get rich quick. We just saw this with a token launch over the weekend, or an investment into a token launch, which is Pump.fun, which is a platform for launching your own meme coins. And I think it had a several $billion ICO, or as you said, initial coin offering. So again, for most people, this is just about what get rich quick scheme can I get into. But there is, and we'll hear from Dan, a pitch for these other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, which is supposed to be the internet's computer, which launched basically saying Bitcoin is only good for peer-to-peer payments and maybe as a store of value. Let's have a blockchain where you can actually build decentralized finance on top of it. And as we've gotten into and will continue to get into, I don't think we've quite seen a pitch for any crypto that's actually been useful besides speculation and store of value. But investors like Dan keep putting money into these projects, believing that they will be able to really revolutionize what global finance looks like.
Yeah, and I should add, we are going to have a specific episode coming up on investing in crypto, if that's the sort of thing you want to do. Dan, of course, is a sort of legendary investor in crypto, so his knowledge will be valuable. But also, I think it'd be a great time just to tell the story of crypto. What are all these coins? What are, what's the point of them all and stuff? And, I guess, Leo, I know you're sort of the more crypto skeptical of the two of us, but, is there any, if I had to make you name a crypto coin you like, can you give me a couple that sort of, you've got a soft spot for in your, cold, no coiner heart?
What's funny is you actually made me do this in my job interview a few years ago, where you made me name a couple other blockchains that weren't Bitcoin. And I think what I named was Solana as one of them, which is basically a type of Ethereum blockchain where you can build financial applications on top of it, but it's even faster and cheaper, theoretically. And then if I were to name another one, You have me stumped there. I think back then I said Axie Infinity, which was this really popular crypto game back then, had its own blockchain, which was used for basically bridging between different ones. But there seems to be a new one each week. There seems to be a lot of VCs making billions of dollars off of them, and we still have yet to really see that breakthrough. So, Jeff, how about you?
I think Ethereum, I think few would dispute there's something real going on there. I do think Solana is interesting. XRP, I'll give it to its staying power. It's been around. Likewise, Litecoin. I mean, frankly, I don't see the point of Litecoin, but it's still here. And then, some of these projects, people are really trying something, and then some of them are obviously, that's just like a bunch of marketing, social media activity to try dump a bunch of tokens and then move on to the next thing. But I think, I suppose Dan will be the one to say, like, if he's actually going to put money in them, which are the legitimate ones. And I think it's easy to be overly skeptical because so many of them are grifts or become grifts, but there is a lot of really smart technologists trying to build something cool. And in the early days of the internet, a lot of it doesn't work out, and that's okay. That's nature of technology. So, I try to keep an open mind and let people put their best foot forward, until they steal all the coins, of course. But, I think there's room not to be too skeptical about some of these.
Well, I'll make sure to ask about it in our interview.
Sounds great. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Here comes Dan.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great seeing you again.
And we have another fun distinction. So the first episode we had noted Bitcoin maxi Jack Mallers, who is famous for his background of empty shelves and gave a good explanation for why he has that. But you have an even more interesting background potentially. Can you just explain what it is for maybe some confused viewers of this?
Yeah, this is the Bitcoin white paper. It is amazing. It's only 3,000 words, easily fits on a small wall. And there was one time somebody has asked me a question about, well, what did Satoshi think? I was like, hang on, and turned around and, the entire white paper's right there.
Helpful context. So Dan, you have the distinction. I think a lot of people claim this, but I think you can fairly claim it as one of the first people in traditional finance to actually move into the crypto space. So obviously you worked at Goldman Sachs and at the legendary investment firm Tiger, but you're an early adopter of Bitcoin. Can you just maybe give a bit of context of your journey into Bitcoin?
Sure. So yeah, my background is as a global macro style investor. So looking around the world for very asymmetric trades, things that, obviously have some risk to them, but if they work, they're going to make, 3, 4, 5 times your money. And over the years, there've been a lot of really cool ones. Like I was an investor in Gazprom and the privatization in 1990 in Russia, and then Japanese bonds and the Argentine real estate and, things like that. So every 3 or 4 years, something interesting would come up. And in 2011, I started reading a little bit about Bitcoin, but in 2013, Pete Briger got me to really focus on it. And it took a while to get my head around it, but I really came to the conclusion it was going to be the biggest trade of a lifetime. Like, it was to be way bigger than all those other trades. Because it's global, it's essentially multi-asset class, it's anyone with a smartphone, it's attacking markets that are absolutely massive. So it is a version of the types of trades I've done my whole career, but just a huge one, much bigger.
And Pete, of course, from the famous private equity firm Fortress.
Yeah, so Pete Briger and I went to college together with a third friend of ours, Mike Novogratz, and the three of us worked on it at the beginning. I was fascinated with it. I went in for a coffee, and that coffee lasted like 3 or 4 hours. And then I actually never left the Fortress office for about 8 years till they finally kicked me out. And just since that time, 2013, I haven't invested in or been interested in anything other than blockchain. It's just that big of a trade.
So I had Jack last episode make the pitch for Bitcoin and why, he's a Bitcoin maxi. I'd love to hear from you. What's the pitch for looking beyond Bitcoin? Obviously, Bitcoin is still here. It has a massive market cap, over $2 trillion, but we've seen this proliferation of other assets. So what got you interested in looking beyond Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I guess the way to say it is, Bitcoin's massively important. It's not just here now, it'll be here 100 years from now. It's really, really important. And it has just owned its use case. If you want to store money and if you want to send money across a border, Bitcoin is it. It's as good as you're ever going to get. There's never going to be an improvement. But if you want to do anything else, like, do Web3 gaming on Bitcoin, it's not that easy. Or if you want to do smart contracts. So the way I think about it is there isn't just one internet company, right? There's 6 or 8 really big ones, and then there's hundreds and hundreds of smaller ones. And that's the way I think of blockchain is, Bitcoin's obviously massively important, and it does what it does so well, but it doesn't change much, and isn't going to do a lot of these other use cases. And so you do need lots of other things. And a way to think about it is, sometimes people say, hey, we don't need, 10,000 new current cryptocurrencies. So I think it's very important to stress that Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, layer ones, they have some attributes of a currency, but they're really, payment rails, well storage things, all that. But most tokens are not even currencies in any respect. They're really digital companies built on top of Solana or Ethereum or another layer one. And so it is important to have, all these different digital entities, digital companies built on top of these other layer ones.
What were some of those first projects that really excited you? You mentioned Ripple, and maybe you can give a brief overview of what Ripple is. Obviously, still one of the most influential companies in the space, but you had other ones that emerged pretty quickly, like Litecoin, obviously Ethereum, Solana a bit later on. Can you talk a bit about that evolution?
Yeah, again, there's different use cases and features. Bitcoin's so good at what it does. And if you're going to store any enormous amount of wealth, $2 trillion, you want to do it on Bitcoin. You don't want to do it on some of these other blockchains. But there are other requirements that have a much faster throughput, much more transactions per second. And maybe you don't care if, 1 or 2 of the transactions get lost, right? And so in the early days, we bought 2% of the world's Bitcoins and 3% of Ripple. And that was our first 2 trades. Ripple is, I think, a very good thing to have in a portfolio because they have, I think, 600 or 700 people building out software that is essentially replacing Swift. We also invested in Ethereum. One of our classmates, Joe Lubin, was one of the founders of Ethereum. That does smart contracts, which are an amazingly important use case and allow all these digital companies to be built on top of Ethereum itself. There are things like privacy enhancing Zcash was, one of our early investments. And so, each of these types of features, needs to be tested out. And the thing I love about blockchain is there's so much essentially creative destruction. Like there's all these cool things being built. Some work, some don't work. But a staggering percentage of what we've invested in works. This is just blows my mind. 86% of the money we've invested in our venture funds for 13 years has made money, which is so crazy. And partly it's because we have a really talented team, but partly it's we're just in the world's best space, that even projects that, may not have achieved exactly what they thought they were when they were starting out, ultimately end up making money.
But I think critics may push back on that and say, there's some element of how crypto projects are able to raise money where the tokens immediately are liquid and have a lot of value and can be traded. Where as a result, you have all of these very well-funded projects that are the early investors and the founders are able to cash out for a ton of money, but they don't necessarily go anywhere. They're not able to fulfill that vision. And as a result, you have this huge landscape of what's called zombie chains, or basically chains that still hold a lot of value monetarily, but don't necessarily have products built on them. So I'm curious how you think about that, basically how to keep building value on this huge amount of blockchains and projects that have emerged.
Yeah, every very, very disruptive thing brings, kind of hype and potentially excessive speculation. And so, yes, there have been some famous examples of things that raised a ton of money and have not worked. Our approach is to do the fundamentals, actually really get to read the white papers, make sure we believe that blockchain is necessary and all those things. And that's helped us invest in projects that actually end up being, value added and, end up making money in the long run. And we still hold so much of our original, we hold things for 5, 10, 12 years. We still hold, things like Ripple Labs, Circle, we've been in forever. So, well, again, I'm sure there's some great examples of, pump and dump people out there that have done some things that, seem sketchy. Our view is, we're very long-term partners with our founders, and, we put our money in and we stay in for a long time. So, if you do that consistently, you can make very good returns in this space.
So I think this podcast will be both for people coming new into the crypto space, as well as obviously people who have been around for a long time and are trying to maybe go deeper into it and understand the history. But I'm curious from your standpoint as someone who has now been evaluating blockchains and crypto projects for well over a decade. How do you go about that? What advice do you have for basically looking at a project and seeing whether you think it'll be viable or not?
Yeah, so a huge first filter is just whether the blockchain is necessary. There used to be a website, but with Bitcoin or but with blockchain and all these different business ideas. And that filters out a ton of things. We're looking for things with very large addressable markets. And then, frankly, it's things whose time has come. There are Bitcoin and blockchain are going to change the world, but not overnight. So there are some things that are too early. We started 12 years ago, and there were things like, payments and competing with Visa, MasterCard that seemed too early. It's probably still 10 years too early. There are things like that that are going to take a long time. We've made a couple of forays into blockchain gaming, and the couple of the first ones didn't work. A couple of first waves didn't work. We have a few companies now that seem like they're gaining traction. So a big part of our process is trying to figure out what's going to happen in the next year or two, rather than decades from now.
Do you see any downsides with this mechanic of crypto where it is, I mean, maybe not easy, but obviously there's a huge explosion of blockchains and cryptocurrencies. Now, obviously, you're seeing the meme coin boom where it is very easy just to launch a new token, and often people are just buying them for pure speculation. Do you see downsides with that approach at all?
Oh, I would say that as long as an investor only invests the amount of money that they could lose and have their spouse still love them, that is safe, and hopefully investing in a somewhat robust portfolio. Don't put all your money into one meme coin or whatever, and certainly don't do it on leverage. So I'm sure there are examples of people who've gotten over their skis and have had bad outcomes, but if you put in just the amount you can hold for a long time, preferably in a more diverse portfolio than just one super small coin, you're probably going to do well. And Bitcoin is the only asset class I've ever encountered in 40 years where everyone that's ever owned a Bitcoin for 4 years has made money. And the minimum return is doubling their money. So again, the past doesn't have to predict the future, but it's been doing that for 13 years that we've been investing. It does. So what I would say is I think it is very important for people to be invested in this space, but do it sensibly. Don't do more than you could afford to lose. And as long as you can hold it, and these things do go in cycles. We've seen 3 down 85% bear markets in our 12 years. I keep saying there probably won't be another one, but there'll probably be a down 60, down 70, so as long as people size things appropriately, it should all come out. And so many people have made, enough money to buy a new house, or really change their lives by investing in crypto. And especially young people, I love it that young people are totally motivated by crypto. Really, I think it's great. It's a generational thing, and I think in 20 years, everybody will have crypto and it'll be just part of a portfolio.
So it seemed for, maybe the first decade, a few more years after that of Bitcoin, there was this rise in new blockchains that were coming out that were hugely influential, like Solana, like Ethereum. Obviously, we've seen a few over the past few years, including some that have received billion-dollar investments from VCs. But do you think that market is saturated for layer one blockchains, or basically, I think the best way to explain it is like the foundational level blockchains that have other applications and blockchains built on top of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with what you're suggesting is that, hey, we've had, functional Bitcoin and blockchains for 15 years. So like the odds something new pops out is lower than it used to be. But the thing I love about blockchain, tomorrow, the coolest project of all time could pop out. And it does happen. And again, in the earliest days, 2013, 14, we were seeing things like Ethereum coming along and XRP and stuff coming along at a more frequent pace than they do now, but they still do come out. We made a very big investment last year in Telegram's Ton token. There are kind of cool new concepts like that do come out still.
What do you think the biggest trends looking forward are going to be, or ones you're excited about? I mean, you mentioned a few. Blockchain gaming obviously has been around for a while, but still hasn't really had that mainstream breakthrough yet. I think payments, you're starting to see change more with stablecoins, obviously being the topic of the day right now. But what are you most excited about right now?
Well, stable coins are very important because they're essentially the Trojan horse of crypto, right? Like they have so much going for them, and they're kind of so easy to use, and they're so easy to adopt. So I think stable coins are very important. They're already the 12th largest holder of treasuries on earth, so as more and more corporations start including stable coins, it'll just bring more people into the blockchain ecosystem. Huge area of our focus is the intersection of AI and crypto. AI is obviously a massively important thing, but it really needs crypto for a couple of reasons. And so a lot of the projects we've invested in over the last 18 months have been, or probably a couple of years, have been things that are decentralized AI compute or models or data. And then obviously AI agents aren't going to go get a bank account down the street. They have to use cryptocurrencies. So that is probably the single biggest area of focus.
Why do you think Bitcoin has managed to retain such a large market share of the overall crypto market? Because I remember a couple years ago when Ethereum was basically changing how its blockchain operates, there was people speculating about what was called the flippening, or basically Ethereum's market cap superseding Bitcoin's, but that didn't happen. Instead, Bitcoin has just taken off. So, I mean, being an early adopter there, why do you think it's managed to maintain that huge lead?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I would say the answer is that Bitcoin has essentially reached escape velocity, right? It is so big, it's so well known that people take it for granted. And for the first 6 or 8 years of this, man, you had to argue super hard just for the existence of Bitcoin and why it was important. And now, you know, uh, go to a conference or talk on a TV show, everyone's like, of course Bitcoin's really important, but what about Ethereum or Solana, right? And so Bitcoin has achieved that escape velocity, is now bigger and permanent in people's minds. And then hey, we got massive entities like BlackRock selling Bitcoin, so when you have very well-known firms like that and their CEO Larry Fink and all these very reputable people out there selling, frankly, most of them are selling just Bitcoin. Most of these big Wall Street firms that do crypto are really mainly selling Bitcoin. And so that's really helped it. And we probably will go for a bit longer, because the ETF has been record ever MicroStrategies, 110 billion of it. So it's really, really in the limelight. And so, there are a lot of very influential people helping Bitcoin grow. And then all the other coins, kind of lack that same, kind of institutional acceptance. But over the years that will probably come.
Last question. Do you have a favorite memory or anecdote from your journey in the crypto space?
Oh, it's been such a blast. I say the earliest days we were investing were the most fun because you really literally could get the entire community into a small space, and we began getting the community together in 2013, actually at my house in Lake Tahoe, and there were only 30 or 40 people, but it includes what are now the CEOs of most of the big exchanges, and Gavin Andreessen, the chief scientist of Bitcoin, and a bunch of regulators like Katie Hahn and CFTC commissioners, Marco Santori, who's now a partner at Pantera. All those people, including incredible libertarians, all in one space, so passionate about the project. And I guess that would be the thing I would close on, is all of the investing I've done in the past, kind of in the end, did it really make a difference? I mean, it made some pension plan an extra basis point or whatever. Here, I think blockchain is going to change the world, right? And so billions of people are going to be able to transmit money more cheaply, save money in a stable currency or an appreciating currency. And all those people were so passionate, they came together, and that and ultimately every year we'd always end with a poker tournament. Everyone threw a Bitcoin in. and the pot was 23 Bitcoin. And so that's just such a funny story that, at the time people, yeah, I'll just chuck a Bitcoin into the center of the poker table.
Probably now one of the biggest pots of the year.
Yeah, it'd be 25 million.
Yeah, high rollers.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, always great to speak. Thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Great interview with Dan, Leo. So did he say anything that surprised you about the wider world of crypto?
I mean, I think the pitch that you frequently hear from people who look beyond Bitcoin is basically there's going to be a number of different internet companies if you think of crypto as the new internet. So they say that Bitcoin won't be the only one. There will be a Google and a Facebook and an Amazon, or you can think about it like web browsers. So they're bullish on the idea that there's different companies and blockchains that can have different utilities. And I think it's a good counter narrative basically to what we heard from the Bitcoin maxis.
Do you buy it though? I mean, this has been the promise for years and years and years, and these things always seem to just, exist initially as like, vehicles for speculation. And then people say, oh, that's normal. I'll just wait. But I think, I guess if you squint, you can see flickers. Ethereum certainly has a role and a place. It could be an internet company, and Solana's emerging as that too. But beyond that, do you buy that narrative?
I mean, I'm sure that you've seen this infinite times over your decade plus covering this, but you always hear other pitches for what crypto can do in terms of decentralizing different spaces, whether it's online gaming or real estate or even payments. And obviously, none of those have really broken through. They always say it's the early innings and you just have to wait for adoption progress to happen. And, I think we're starting to see that in some areas like stable coins, which are starting to break through now. But at the same time, to think that crypto will play an integral part in other industries like AI, and you need these other blockchains to do it, I think we have yet to really see that happen. How do you think about that pitch?
Well, I mean, I do think the new regulatory climate is a game changer because, for last 10 years, the industry has been playing defense and trying to survive. And now if there's I do believe in blockchain technology. I think it's legitimate, but once again, sometimes it's a solution looking in search of a problem. But I do think there's a role for it to arrive and become part of the technology landscape. The other thing I'll say, Leo, too, is, within the first .com boom around 2000, 2001, everyone's talking about the World Wide Web and, as they called it, the information superhighway. And that became a huge bust. And then a lot of people were saying, well, that internet thing, that sure was overhyped, huh? And then, of course, a lot of the promises in that early era, people put out these, crazy visions of you'd have pet food driven to your house and stuff like that. And then, as it turned out, it took 10 years to do it. So I don't think the blockchain is quite analogous to the internet because the, consumer applications to the internet were so obvious right away. But I do think that, maybe this time around, some of that, there's many promises could actually turn into reality. Not most of them, but some of them. Anyways, I thought it was a very sort of illuminating, lesson from Dan on the broader world, which I think even if you don't want to invest it or participate in it, it's good to know it's out there. Even if you're Bitcoin maxi, I think it's important to know what the landscape looks like. And next week, we're going to take quite a turn. We're going to look at the darker side of crypto, which is your favorite, Leo, the scams, the heists, and so on, with an episode called Crypto Crime with a fellow named Jonathan Levin, who was one of the first sort of crypto crime fighters with his firm Chainalysis. That should be a good one. For now, though, we are all wrapped up. I'm Jeff John Roberts.
And I'm Leo Schwartz. See you next time.
This was the Crypto Playbook, a podcast by Fortune Magazine.
This episode was produced by Jalon Ursoy and edited by Ellen Estev. Art direction by Ariel Ray. Fortune's executive producer is Lydia Randall. Head of video is Adam Bannicky.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.